Following the success of Fede Alvarez's 2013 Evil Dead remake, there were immediately plans put in place to do yet another film in the series. And while many of the specific ideas initially fell through, and while Bruce Campbell eventually did come back, it was in the form of a television show in Ash vs. the Evil Dead. The film series itself was put on ice for a little while, until recently, in which Lee Cronin was tapped to do another film in the series. That is how we get to Evil Dead Rise, the 5th film in this franchise. Once again, moving away from the story of Ash Williams and his exploits, and moving it out of the classic cabin in the woods setting altogether. Is this film a worthy entry into the series? A series in which many, myself included, will argue doesn't have many misses. Hi, I'm Mackheim, and welcome back to Full Stop Reviews. Hi, welcome back to Full Stop Reviews. Welcome back to Scope Networks. As always, give us a like, comment, subscribe, and have you been following the Evil Dead franchise the way we have? So, for those of you who might just be tuning in for the first time, I've been going through the Evil Dead franchise bit by bit to talk about the development of the series with the anticipation of this movie, Evil Dead Rise. So, I've already reviewed the original film and the 2013 remake, and after this, I'm going to be taking a look at some of the other notable points in the franchise's history, from Evil Dead 2 to Army of Darkness to Ash vs. the Evil Dead. So stick around, this is going to be a whole series. Following the release of Fede Alvarez's very popular 2013 reboot of The Evil Dead, there were a lot of ideas thrown around as to what to do next. Sam Raimi was talking about having his brother write Evil Dead 4, which would have been ostensibly a follow-up to Army of Darkness, and while a lot of those ideas kind of morphed into the TV show in Ash vs. the Evil Dead, and there was like a video game that came out a few years even after that, ideas for the film series kind of went stop and start for a while. Fede Alvarez was very much interested in returning to the franchise, but with the success of Don't Breathe, he was tapped to do a follow-up to that movie, which he ended up doing. A lot of ambiguity in the direction of the franchise, and after Ash vs. the Evil Dead, Bruce Campbell came out and said he was a little bit tired of playing Ash due to the physical demands of the role and just how taxing and how intense the scheduling could get sometimes. Let's face it, he was in his 20s when he first played Ash. The man is in his upper 60s now, so if he doesn't want to swing a chainsaw around and get covered in gobs and gobs of blood and prosthetics and what have you, I think he's earned the right to say that. With the Fede Alvarez, I guess, timeline kind of in limbo, Bruce Campbell a little bit hesitant to come back for the role, the decision was made to take the franchise in a different direction, and so that's what we have here. So let's take a look at how this new film fares. Alyssa Sutherland plays Ellie, a woman who is a single mother watching over her 3 kids, who reunites with her somewhat estranged sister who has fallen pregnant. Things get wacky when there's an earthquake that traps them in the apartment building that they're currently in, and this earthquake also reveals a vault in the basement containing one of the books of the dead. One of the curious details is that the movie actually says that this is one of 3 copies in existence. I'm gonna presume that the other 2 copies of this Book of the Dead are the one that Ash finds and burns in the original, and then the other one that Mia finds in the 2013, as this film is technically supposed to all be in the same continuity as the other 4. So one of the unique things about this movie is that by changing the location, you change the tenor of a lot of this story. You have these characters trapped in an apartment building instead of like teenagers on a woods. Another change is that there's a much stronger focus on the family. So it's Beth as like this estranged sister, and then Ellie as this overworked, very, very exhausted mother, and then 2 teenage kids, and then 1 very younger kid. A lot of the tension comes from this family fighting to stay together. So that was a kind of a cool look, because one of the things I praised Evil Dead 2013 for was introducing other thematic ideas to kind of up the stakes and introduce a little bit more dramatic tension than what we would normally see in these movies. Not that that was a shot at the other movies, because the other movies were trying to accomplish something a little bit more comedic than these previous 2 are, but I do enjoy that they gave these things a little bit more dramatic tension. Lee Cronin does a really good job directing this. This movie is very, very economically paced. There's not really a single wasted scene or single wasted minute. Some of the foreshadowing is more than a little bit on the nose. Like there's a gag involving a drone in the very beginning of the film, and a character makes a remark saying, "Oh, this thing will cut your face up." Well, guess what happens 5 minutes later, you know? And then there's a scene of a pair of scissors falling under like a couch, and so, well, guess how those come back into play. So it's just like, it's stuff like that, and so it's a little bit on the nose, but it's not like corny or anything, so it doesn't. I personally don't mind, and I don't think you would either, because of the extra focus on like the idea of this familial unit. You have kind of like a stronger through line and increased stakes as the situation gets more and more dire for these people, because for once it's kids in danger. So I'm going to start talking about spoilers in another minute or two. I'll put time codes in the description if you're like, if you still want to see this movie. So I'll be a little bit vague about the specifics of what I liked and didn't. I'll elaborate this a little bit more on the spoiler section, but I think some of the thematic ideas could have been explored a little bit more, and some of the payoffs I don't think quite had the impact that they should have. That said, this film was a very enjoyable ride. There was a lot of really fun sequences. Like, there's one of the highlights for me was this section where this character's looking out of the peephole out of her apartment building, and so you see from this like weird peephole fisheye lens type of angle of this the monsters are called deadites. This deadite just going on a rampage throughout the hallway of the apartment, and that was a fun scene. The opening like 5 or 6 minutes, despite the fact that it doesn't really have anything to do with the rest of the movie, it's just kind of there as a hook. The opening scenes are quite fun, especially with this deadite rising out of the water in the title sequence reveal. When that happened, I was immediately drawn into the movie. I was immediately on board. I was buying what they were selling. It was a lot of fun. From a non-spoiler standpoint, I will give this movie a green light. I was kind of teetering on green-yellow because I think some of the execution wasn't as strong as it probably should have been. But I think this movie gets so much right with what it does do that I can't really punish it too much. Okay, so that's the non-spoiler part. I'm going to start getting a little bit more detailed with what I'm going to talk about, starting in 5, 4, 3. I mentioned earlier that whole idea is that it's this family fighting to stay together, and the first person that gets possessed is Alyssa Sutherland's Ellie, so it's the mom is the main villain. And that's kind of a fun look because with the way that these deadites historically act in these movies, sometimes they pretend that they're not possessed in order to gain trust. And so there's like a really, really intense sequence later on in the movie where she's pretending that she's okay, and she's tricking like this 8-year-old girl into unlocking the door and letting her back into the apartment. You know what? You're screaming at the screen, hey, don't open the door, don't open the door. But it's like this 8-year-old kid who's so friggin' traumatized that it's like, okay, it makes sense that she'd open the door. A lot of the choices make a lot of sense. I do think if you're gonna do the mother as the villain and you're gonna do those kind of themes, this has actually been kind of like a running theme in horror for the last 15 to 20-ish years. I actually did a breakdown on one such movie with A Descent, but like other movies that kind of touch on these themes are like The Conjuring, The Babadook, friggin' Hereditary. This theme is something that has actually been fairly common recently in horror, and for the most part, the movies I just mentioned all deal with those themes pretty well. But it's like, I think one of the problems with the Evil Dead franchise nowadays, and again, I'm talking about the movie in like a meta context and not necessarily in how well this movie executes, because I think this movie executes what it sets out to do very well. But I guess my main issue is that from a meta standpoint, we've seen the execution of a lot of these themes in other ways before, where it's like the mom gets possessed and then turns on her family, and so it's this kind of like underlying frustration with the pressures of parenthood or something like that. Like The Conjuring kind of has the same plot where the mother slowly gets broken down and possessed, and then like Hereditary has something similar happen. The Descent isn't a possession movie, but it has kind of that idea. The Babadook certainly has that theme to it as well. So I personally would have liked to have seen, like, if you're going to go there with your themes, I wish they had gone a little bit. It just felt a little bit surface level with the way they dealt with it. And I don't know if that's the fix to that is something as simple as just adding a few scenes in or something, because one of the things I praised with this movie, and I stand by this movie is very economic. It doesn't really waste time, so I don't really know like what that sweet spot balance that they should have hit would be. But for me, especially because, spoiler warning, this is a major spoiler, 2 of the kids end up dying. If you're going to have this tension about the family fighting to stay together, we need to feel the impact of that a lot more than it does, because by the point that happens in the movie is just so focused on scaring and grossing you out that the tragic impact of this family shattering and this mother killing two of her kids, or the kids being forced to fight and kill each other, I don't think the true horror of that situation fully gets delved into. And so I think that in and of itself is a bit of a missed opportunity. So here's one example of what I'm talking about. The youngest daughter is forced to stab her possessed older sister in the mouth to fight her off. But this little girl is like fine 2 scenes later. She was just forced to kill her older sibling, someone she was seen playing around with and bonding with earlier. So we need to feel the impact of that moment, and this character needs to be freaking traumatized after that. I know that The Evil Dead doesn't typically do that kind of thing, but there really isn't any comedy in this movie, and so if you're gonna take the comedy out, you need to go full on with the impact and full on with the horror of what is going on. So I'm gonna compare this to the 2013 version just for a few minutes to elaborate on this. The tension in the 2013 version is that the first person that gets possessed is someone who is going through withdrawals. When she starts acting out or acting crazy or even self-destructive, for a few of the characters, it's stuff that they've seen before, and for a few of the others, they think she's just using again or something. But when some of the other characters start getting possessed and start hurting themselves or each other, the true horror of that scene is allowed to stay. Like, some of the characters are a little too shocked to immediately take action. Some of them are a little hesitant to start carving up their family and loved ones. And some of the others are, there's one really, really hard to watch scene in the 2013 where the demon actually leaves one of the characters' bodies after she's being done mutilated. And this character's just in tears and she's in so much pain, and it's the girl missing her arms. If you've seen that movie, you know what I'm talking about. There's nothing like that here. So I think the true emotional impact of this family splitting apart should have been driven home a little bit more. And if you're gonna do those themes, and I don't think the movie is bad for having those themes in there, don't get me wrong, but we've seen these themes done so well in so many other recent horror projects that I just wish that they had something a little bit more to say than just using it as a setup for a premise. Because the fact that it's kids in danger and it's this family in danger does automatically increase the stakes. I just wish they had gone further with it. I think the apartment building setting, it was unique to move it to an apartment building, and the usage of having an earthquake trap the characters in an apartment for a little bit was kind of an interesting way to A, cut off cell service, and B, keep them there because they're in California. That's what happens. There's earthquakes. I do think that the apartment setting should have been used a little bit more to the movie's advantage. If you're dealing with demons that can kind of reproduce and possess people from contact, and there's an entire apartment building of these things that you have to fight your way through, like if you guys have ever seen the movie Wreck or its English language remake, Quarantine, it'd be kind of a similar idea where they're stuck in one location with a whole bunch of zombies. There's even a scene where some of the surviving characters start fighting their way down to the first floor through the apartment. And it's a little bit easier than it probably should have been, that they really only have to deal with one floor of zombies, and the zombies the deadites for the most part don't even, just kind of stay there haunting the characters. So I just think that by the time the third act comes, there's some fun payoffs. The characters do get their shotgun. There's a character that does use a chainsaw because it's Evil Dead. You have to go there at some point. It was a very interesting premise. I just think that you could have done a little bit more with the location and the environment that you placed your story in. Acting was actually really, really good, which is kind of a challenge because a lot of the actors are younger. So 3 of the main characters are all under 20, under 18. One of them's, I think, under 10, and her actress is, I think, 12. They're all very believable, and one of the bigger challenges out of movie making is getting believable performances out of child actors. So props to Lee Cronin and the entire cast and crew for this. The bit between the 2 sisters is really great, especially because one kind of looks down on the other. One's an overworked mother. The other one gets pregnant accidentally, and she's trying to decide if she wants to be a mother after seeing what happens to her sister. I wish their relationship had been a little bit more expanded upon before the latter gets possessed. But again, before I give my final rating, I already did kind of rate this movie a little bit earlier. Going forward, Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell have said that they do want to return to this franchise. Bruce Campbell has started to walk back his "I'm never playing Ash again" comments. He'd say that he'd come back in like smaller roles or if Sam Raimi directs. And the producers have already said that if this does well, they're definitely interested in going forward and potentially tying it again into some of the earlier movies. Lee Cronin apparently already has ideas for what to do next. And Bruce Campbell even said something to the effect of they want a new movie in this series coming out every 2 to 3 years. Not only are the demons getting resurrected, but so too is this franchise. Did this movie complete its mission of revitalizing the franchise and telling a good scary story all at the same time? I'm gonna say for the most part, yes, it did. So I am going to give this a somewhat tentative green light. I was kind of on like the hedge of like, it'd be somewhere between a green and a yellow if I had a tier there. But I think this movie does get so much right that I can't knock it down a tier. I do think there's a number of missed opportunities for what they could have gotten out of that premise. That said, I do think with what it does do, it's an engaging ride. There's a lot of tension, there's a lot of scares, there's a lot of really great gore, maybe not necessarily as much as some of the previous ones, but I do think there's enough to keep people invested in what's going on and invested into seeing what happens next. All right, so that's all I have for you today, guys. Thanks for sticking around to the end. And remember, check out the other videos in this franchise. I'm going to be doing a little bit more with this franchise going forward. My coworker, Abe, just put out an amazing video essay on Attack on Titan, so go ahead and watch that one and see what you think. With this franchise kind of coming back and resurrecting, where would you like to see it go next? Do you want a sequel to this one? Do you want a sequel to 2013? Something else? Do you want them to revitalize Ash vs. Evil Dead and do a season 4 of that one because that one ends on a cliffhanger? Where do you want this franchise to go next? I just want to see it continue, and I'm happy that it is. And the knowledge that they kind of Easter egged 2 other books of the, like, Necronomicon Books of the Dead kind of does tie it into some of the other movies, so I'm curious to see if some of them back. I just want Jane Levy to come back, please. But until then, and until the next video in this series, it's Full Stop Reviews. So Evil Dead Rise is directed by Lee Cronin and stars Lily Sullivan and Ashley. And stars Lily Sullivan and Alyssa Sutherland. Good God, do you have any idea how hard those names are to pronounce? Alyssa Sutherland and Lily Sullivan. Alyssa Sutherland, Lily Sullivan. You know what? Why didn't you say it 5 times fast?